here again in Mexico City. I was here 4 years ago. It was my last event before COVID, and then I have to cancel many. Nothing has changed. Every moment I'm enjoying the city. It's beautiful architecture, wonderful people, beautiful interactions. So thank you all personally for coming. There's a long list of people to thank, but I think most of them were already thanked in Spanish. So I have my own little list here. And first of all, I want to thank my colleague and friend, Francisco Gil White, for his intense pursuit of human rights, diversity, eugenics, Holocaust, and Jewish rights. And then, most importantly, I would like to thank Yad Vashem in Mexico, Nina Medrez, and all the people involved with Yad Vashem. I was at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem many years ago. It was a tiny structure with a very small cafeteria, and it's grown to something very important now. And I think that the concept of Yad Vashem is no longer just for us to remember what has occurred, but to avoid the prediction. Now, I'm happy to be here in this absolutely beautiful synagogue, Mount Sinai. The last time I was in Mount Sinai, I went up on a camel, but this time I drove here in a car. I'd like to take a couple of moments of silence. My father passed away. He was a partisan in the Polish woods. Just before I came here, I diverted to Florida for the funeral. Then I came here. I'd also like to take a small moment of silence for our hostages and our boys and girls fighting. God should help us. Okay, so Sunday, I was at the Museum of Tolerance, beautiful place. I gave a lecture on Israel and international law, and I've given that lecture maybe 50 times in 50 places around the world. And tomorrow I'll be at Magen David, and I'll be doing IBM and the Holocaust. And I've done that scores of times. Today I'll be doing the boycott that Hitler feared for the first time. It was Francisco's persuasion that got me to do this. It's from my first bestseller in 1984 called The Transfer Agreement. Now, I don't have any books with me. Normally I do in the States, but if anybody wants any of my books, you go to edwinblack.com/books, and you can order one, and I'll autograph it. If you want it much cheaper, you go to Amazon. And so I'm going to explain to you for the first time in almost 40 years all about this topic. It was my first bestseller in 1984. The IBM book was my second bestseller. So this one was first. Now, it would be easy for me to talk about the Holocaust, about the Einsatzgruppen, about the gas chambers, and these are the painful details that you've been accustomed to hearing. But I'm not going to talk about any of that. You already know that story. I am going to be talking about Jews fighting back, and I'm going to be talking about money. So that's what this is about. When I was growing up in Chicago, it was all about trying to understand the scope of the bloodletting, of the killing, of the shooting pits, of the gas chambers, of the trains, just understanding what was done. And no one asked the questions of how it came to be. And I was the first one, the very first one, to bring up the issue of economics and the Holocaust. Now that's all everyone talks about is economics, good market reparations, stolen property, etc., etc. But when I did it in 1984, it was considered verboten to talk about money. But I did because I thought it was important. And this is before, way before I was able to document that 5 major American companies were able to, were indispensable to helping Hitler plan and execute his Holocaust. IBM, General Motors, Ford, the Carnegie Institution, and the Rockefeller Foundation. This is not trading with the enemy. This is actual indispensable collusion, knowingly, with the Nazis to destroy the Jews. So this was my first effort. Actually did this, I know all of us are working on computers, but I actually wrote this book on a typewriter. And every time I changed the footnote, it had to be retyped. It was retyped 34 times. But I had a very good IBM typewriter at the time. So, we're going to be talking about money. It's a very complex topic, subject, and field. Now, if you just want to find out how many people got killed, another lecture will be much easier. But this is going to put you a magnitude above in comprehension of what happened and how it happened. And in the process, learn that the Jews did fight back. When I was growing up, they said, well, the Jews never fought back. The Jews, no one knew about this. And I was able to make this the big lie, knowing that the Jews did fight back, and they fought back from the first minute. So we're going to get into the boycott and what it meant. It's so complicated that I made a couple of notes about part of this. We'll be talking in different phases to give you the understanding you need. You will have to understand all the great foundation stones to see how tall this tower was. So, everybody knows that Germany lost World War I, right? And you all know what the Treaty of Versailles was, yes? All right, the Treaty of Versailles was signed in 1919, and in 1921, they agreed on the schedule of payments that is the war reparations that Germany was to pay. This is very important. And those war reparations were 132 billion gold marks, 33 billion US dollars in reparations to cover all the civilian damage. So you have to start there. You have to start with $33 billion on Germany's head. Next. And what we'll eventually have to discuss whether the good mark and the reparations of Germany was a matter of justice or economic benefit for the people going to collect. Okay, they were allowed to pay that they didn't have that money. It's impossible. They didn't have that money. And so they allowed payments in both money and in kind, materials, steel, paper, trucks, and trees. And Germany defaulted on 100,000 telephone poles. That was a payment. They owed 100,000 telephone poles. And because all of this material, this wealth coming out of Germany into the Allies was a great economic boom to the United States and Allies. When they defaulted, Belgium and France invaded the Ruhr, okay? They took over so they could seize the assets. It's as though you defaulted on the debt and somebody came to take over your house. You should know, and very few people know, that although France and Belgium soldiers were patrolling the streets of Berlin and Germany, they were African soldiers, African colonists. And that was considered a further aggravation within the context of the times. And then, of course, you all know, the men went on strike, and the German government encouraged them to go on strike, and they had no wages, and the German government said, Weimar will just print the money, and then you had hyperinflation, and the cost of a loaf of bread was one thing in the morning and 100 times more expensive in the afternoon. This led, this difficulty, this chaos, these economic chaos led, I'm telling you stuff that no one else is going to tell you, to the Dawes Plan, D-A-W-E-S, Charles G. Dawes. And what this is law. So the United States enacted a special program to relieve Germany of the burden of paying its war debt. And that meant that they were able to pay in restructured fashion, smaller payments. And that was then succeeded by the Young Plan, which was invented by the president of General Electric. And he came up with the idea that the $300 billion should be reduced to $29 billion and paid annually over 58 years. 58 years. And just so you know, Germany only finished paying in 2010. In 2010. So that Germany would have to pay 121 trillion Reichsmarks. 100 million, billion, trillion Reichsmarks in 59 equal payments to a brand new bank called the Bank for International Settlements. And now Germany is still suffering under the war debt. And what does this mean? This is all the road to Hitler. This is not just economics, but the road to Hitler, because the country was going crazy. And in 1932, they further adjusted, just before Hitler came to power, they further adjusted the finances. But eventually, the stock market took over, and Germany could not pay. Hitler came to power and disavowed all of these reparations. So, the question is, what did we know, and when did we know it, and who took action? First of all, I don't want you to think that there was any secrets in this Holocaust thing, in the rise of Hitler. Hitler had an advertising campaign. Joseph Goebbels was the minister of propaganda. They had press releases. I was able to document everything that happened because it was published so profusely. And we have to remember also that a girl hidden in the attic in Amsterdam wrote in her diary, she was hidden up there, that they're gassing the Jews in Poland. Everything was known, everything was in the New York Times, Everybody knew about it. So the question is, who was going to do something about it? That's our fundamental question. Who was going to do something about it? Because $800 million had been loaned from Wall Street to Germany to help it repay the debt. This is a whole system. It's a whole system of gout. So Wall Street could not afford to have Hitler fail. But the Jews could not afford to have Hitler succeed. Now let's talk about the Jews. Who were the big Jews in the United States? The United States was mainly where the big Jewish powerhouses were. Three major Jewish organizations: American Jewish Committee, B'nai B'rith of the Anti-Defamation League, and the American Jewish Congress, which represented the working man, the average man, the Eastern European man, and the Yiddish-speaking man. These guys in the committee and B'nai B'rith were the defenders of the Jewish people for generations. In the Damascus affair, in the Dreyfus affair, and they fought the Tsar in World War I. They made it impossible for the Tsar to get loans to continue the war, which led to the downfall of the Tsar. They financed the Japanese Navy in the Battle of the Tsushima Straits, so the Russians lost. These were the guys who said, I don't care what kind of retaliation you do, we're going to fight back. But not this time. American Jewish Committee, German guys. B'nai B'rith, German guys. American Jewish Congress, Polish guys, Russian guys, other guys. So the guys who were fighting back, whose job it was to fight back, were afraid to fight back because this time the retaliation would not be against Serge or Sasha, but against Jaime or Suzanne or their cousins. So when Hitler came to power on January 30th, 1933, his goals were clear. Don't think that this was all discovered when Eisenhower walked through Dachau with a camera crew behind him. They were talking about extermination already from 1933. Because extermination was a word that they knew from the last extermination of the Armenians in 1914. And you'll recall that Hitler said early on, who will remember the Armenians? So there's all sorts of atrocities against the Jews going on in the first days and even before January 30th, 1933, by Germans against the Jews. The Jews, they make them bend down and clean up the streets with the toothbrushes. You've seen it. They pull them out of their houses. They, on March 8th of 1933, they opened, actually March 10th, March 8th, they opened Oranienburg concentration camp, and March 10th, they opened Dachau. And they gave press releases. They were proud of it. And they made it clear to the German Jewish leadership that you do nothing and you say nothing. We're going to call it gruel propaganda, exaggeration. Because the one thing we need in Germany, the one thing that Hitler needs, is jobs and bread. Employment to come out of the Depression. And employment, it was an export economy. And that means that in order for Germany to continue its economic self-sustaining growth, it had to export goods to Czechoslovakia, to England, to Canada, to New York City, to Mexico City, to Boston, all over the world. And Hitler was afraid of what the Jews could do economically. Now, this is an important concept. Hitler was actually afraid of an imaginary Jewish power. Hitler believed in the phony baloney that Henry Ford put out about the Jews owning and controlling all the media and all the economic systems and the manipulations of Wall Street and all of that. You will remember that at the end of the 19th century, there was a typescript that was given from man to man, maybe a few copies here and a few copies there, by the Russian secret police. Well, they got to a guy in America called Henry Ford. Henry Ford was a mechanical genius and an intellectual idiot. He once wasn't sure. He once thought that the Revolutionary War in the United States was fought in 1812. And he said, when asked about books, I really don't like to read books. But Henry Ford was given this typescript, and he fell for it, hook, line, and sinker, and quit his job as the president of Ford Automobiles, appointed his nephew, another idiot called Edsel, and Henry Ford bought the Dearborn Independent, opened up a printing shop on company property, and started translating and mass producing the protocols of the elders of Zion, the international Jew, and all these Jewish conspiracies. Remember, there was no automation as we know it until Henry Ford brought it. So Henry Ford was able to export literally hundreds of thousands, millions of copies of the International Jew and the Dearborn Independent and all this anti-Semitic stuff, and he actually made it a full product of the Ford Motor Company. A full product. And he was the idol, Ford, of Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler, first edition of Mein Kampf, not the second. When I do my research, I always check the drafts. Said only one brave man, Henry Ford, can resist the power of the Jews. And when Henry Ford was defeated in the boycott by the Jews, the Jewish boycott against the Ford Motor Company, and he gave in and he withdrew all the Dearborn Independent so he could sell a brand new car called the Model A. When he did that, Hitler had a picture of Henry Ford on his piano, a very large one. He changed Mein Kampf, took Henry Ford's name out, and it said, very few can resist the power of the Jews. So this means that while Hitler and the Nazis were willing to do battle against armies, England, the United States, France, Poland, the one thing that Hitler really feared was the secret powers, the fake secret powers of the Jews. He read, of course, that the Jews in Basel, yes, it was Basel, I believe, in the cemetery, got together like on a Halloween party, and were rapping on tombstones and making a covenant to control the world. They actually believed this nonsense. It was Prague. Okay, but they called it the Basel Protocol sometimes. So he did not want to provoke a Jewish retaliation, because the Jews were famous for boycotts. They boycotted Henry Ford, the world's leading anti-Semite. The world's leading anti-Semite. When Ford was still in prison. Okay? He believed that they caused World War I. That they were behind all these trillions of dollars that I told you about in reparations. The so-called stab in the back. That they were the reason. They were the Unglück. The unlucky part of Germany was Jewish economic power. And that is why he not only wanted to displace the Jews, but to dismantle their economic power. The Jews, on the other hand, especially the American Jewish Congress Jews, the Eastern Jews, the working man Jews, the Union Jews, they believed in the boycott. The boycott was originated in 1638 in Ireland by Captain Boycott. And he was charging so much money to the people renting, and they hated him, and so they all withheld their rent all at once, and that became the use of the word boycott. But the Jews had learned to use boycott as an effective weapon. So Hitler comes to power on January 30th, 1933. The whole world knows he wants to destroy the Jews. He's broadcasting it. He's got a book, Mein Kampf. Henry Ford is with him. The head of General Motors is supporting him. The United States government can't afford to let this guy fail. And so the Jews want to protest, and the German Jewish leadership did not want to protest. So the very first protest was not in 1939 when the war began, not in 1938, Kristallnacht, not in 1935, the Nuremberg laws, which were helped formulated by the Carnegie Institution in the United States. But on March 27th, 1933, March 23rd, 1933, and it was right here. This was the Jewish war veterans. And these were the guys who fought the Germans just a few years before in the trenches of World War I. The big shots told these guys, you can't make a tzimis. You cannot make a disturbance because Hitler will retaliate. They said, we cannot shirk. We cannot fall back from our duty. So these were the little guys, the nobodies, but they marched. And in those days, when you had a parade, everybody lined up, and it was almost as big as the one I saw on the main street a couple of days ago for your electoral agency. All right, so I put a few slides together for you to understand. Now, they say we're going to boycott Germany. Don't buy German goods. Don't buy the China. Don't buy the drugs. Don't get on the ocean liners. Don't buy the film. Don't buy the dolls. Don't buy the toys. Don't buy the fabric. Don't buy any of this. And that was a great idea because America was in a depression. And if you could re-steer the purchase of silverware and of pharmaceuticals and of films and of dolls and toys and all the things, lampshades, all the things that Germany made steel, who would get the benefit? The labor unions. And so what emerged was not just the Jews, but an entire mobilized America, mobilized as a boycott against Germany that everyone found useful, not only for moral grounds, for co-religionist grounds, but because it was also to their economic advantage. In other words, a perfect boycott. And that led to a giant million-man march. This was all forgotten. Everything was forgotten until I did my book. Nobody wanted to know about it because it brought up stuff that nobody talked about. And whenever they're not talking about it, and you bring it up, you didn't have permission, you get resistance. So, next. On March 27th, 1933, I just made a few pictures for you. This is the group going to Madison Square Garden and 30 other protest movements around the United States in concert with speakers outside, filled to the rafters, boycott Nazi Germany. Christians, Jews, labor unions, Protestants, Catholic Church, a unified boycott. Next. This is Madison Square Garden, filled to the rafters.